Imagine this. One of cinema's most legendary figures, the man whose rasping voice and fierce intensity defined a generation of film, Al Pacino, is now 84. Yet behind the iconography of Scarface and The Godfather lies a quieter, more somber reality few have seen. No roaring ovations. No red carpets. Instead, a sprawling but shadowed townhouse in Los Angeles where echoing hallways carry whispers of a life spent conquering the silver screen. Friends describe corridors once filled with laughter now lined with dusty scripts and half-finished manuscripts. Walls that once hosted awards now bear subtle cracks, the lighting dimmed by heavy drapes drawn tight against nosy eyes. This is Pacino at 84, living alone, touched by aging subtle betrayals, memory lapses, creaking bones, the slow fade of that electrifying presence that once commanded every frame. Once upon a time, Pacino was everywhere. In studios, on magazine covers, on marquee lights screaming Al Pacino. By 1973, at just 33, he had cemented his place in Hollywood history with Michael Corleone's chilling rebirth in The Godfather Part 2. That role catapulted him into an enviable orbit. Oscars, critical acclaim, the kind of status that freezes time. But even as he swept up trophies, whispers swirled about the man behind the legend. Was he too intense? Too driven? Co-stars told tales of Pacino's all-consuming method acting, losing sleep, refusing to break character, locking himself in studios for days to channel inner demons. On set, chairs would sit empty, Pacino vegan fast tracking his way into Parker-like precision. Yet that obsession birthed cinematic gold. But it also sowed seeds of isolation, a career so singularly defined that normal life seemed out of reach. By the mid-1980s, Al Pacino was a portrait of success. Blockbuster hits like Scarface and Sea of Love cemented his mythos. Yet behind the portraits lay personal hardship. Romantic entanglements flickered in tabloids, passionate relationships with Diane Keaton, Beverly D'Angelo, Lucilla Sola. Each intense affair trailing heartbreak and public scrutiny. The man who could evoke tender vulnerability on screen seemed incapable of settling down in private life. Friends recall empty nights on grand couches, Pacino staring at unplayed vinyl records, haunted by the intimacy he couldn't sustain. By age 50, he had no spouse, no marriage certificate. He had 2 children whose mothers stayed out of the spotlight. In interviews, he spoke of love lost, unspoken regrets, and a yearning for connection beyond the camera's lens. As the years rolled on, roles grew scarce. Pacino's once unstoppable momentum slowed under the weight of time and changing tastes. The 1990s brought flops and indifferent reviews. Directors whispered Pacino was too old school, too heavy for emerging franchises hungry for lighter, blockbuster-friendly faces. So he retreated into theater, Shakespeare and Chekhov, finding solace in live audiences who still hung on his every syllable. Yet even on Broadway, the man who once filled stadiums now performed to half-empty houses. Critics praised his stamina but noted a weariness in his voice, a slight tremor that betrayed age. Inside that LA townhouse, the absence of applause has given way to a daily routine marked by solitude. Mornings begin late, curtains undrawn, shafts of California sun filtered through dusty blinds. A slender breakfast, black coffee, toast, then a review of mail. Fan letters, a handful from overseas, each praising Serpico or Dog Day Afternoon, begging for a glimpse of their hero. But Pacino rarely responds. Instead, he slips into a fading velvet armchair, watching VHS tapes of his own films, nostalgia mingled with self-critique. In the afternoons, he wanders into a small, cluttered study lined with framed photos. A young Pacino flashing a mischievous grin beside Meryl Streep at Cannes. A sober family portrait of him cradling baby Anton. Yet the study's centerpiece is an empty director's chair embroidered Al, a symbolic nod to projects never made, collaborations that never came to fruition. Evenings carry the heaviest weight. Dinner arrives from a nearby cafe, takeout pasta, dry bread. He eats by candlelight at a solitary table, the silence so complete it's almost deafening. Occasionally, a neighbor hears piano keys drifting through open windows. Pacino teaching himself new chords, hoping music might fill a void film cannot. But the piano's notes often halt midway, chords unresolved. That halted melody mirrors a life once so vibrant, now defined by what remains unplayed. There are days when the phone rings, a trusted producer checking in, a director offering a cameo in a streaming series. Pacino listens politely but rarely accepts. Some say he's conserving his legacy, afraid one misstep might tarnish a career built on masterpieces. Others whisper it's deeper, a fear of return, of re-exposing himself to a world that once adored him but now demands more than memory stock footage. On rare occasions, he ventures out, quiet dinners at dimly lit Italian restaurants, heads turning as patrons recognize the silver-haired legend. He smiles, nods, then slips away, slipping back into the quiet darkness he has made his refuge. At 84, Al Pacino's life is a study in contrasts. Monumental triumph versus creeping solitude. Youthful intensity versus the slow erosion of time. Public devotion versus private emptiness. The trappings of fame remain: awards, photographs, a name etched in Hollywood lore, but their shine has dulled. In those empty rooms, we glimpse the cost of living too fully in the spotlight. As Pacino himself once warned in Scarface, in this country, you gotta make the money first. Then when you get the money, you get the power. Then when you get the power, then you get the women. But perhaps he never mentioned the price: loneliness, regret, and a twilight marked not by applause but by the echoes of a life lived larger than anyone's imagination. Some mornings, Al Pacino wakes before dawn, the weight of the day pressing on him like a leaden curtain. He sits atop a narrow bed in a sparsely furnished bedroom, the only sound the quiet hum of the air conditioner struggling against Los Angeles heat. At 84, his body protests every movement: aching hips, an arthritic right knee that clicks ominously when he stands. Yet he rises and shuffles across creaking floorboards to a small kitchenette, where a single espresso shot awaits in a chipped porcelain cup. He downs it without a flinch, then leans against the counter, closing his eyes to savor the bitterness that jolts his mind awake for another day in near retirement. After coffee, he dons a faded cashmere sweater and descends into what he calls his studio, a dim annex behind the main house. There, layers of tobacco-stained scripts lie piled on a dusty table. Abandoned film projects, unproduced plays, and unfinished novels he once vowed to adapt for the screen. His fingers trace the worn spines of Polanski's Macbeth translation, an Olivier-bound Shakespeare anthology, and the leather cover of an unmailed letter to Francis Ford Coppola begging for just one more scene as Michael Corleone. His breath catches at the memory: Coppola's warm laughter on set, the white-hot flood of spotlights, the applause that once felt as vital as air. Now the scripts lie silent, their edges curled, as if waiting for a spark that may never come. Noon finds him in the living room, near a propped-open French door, letting in a sliver of warm sunlight and the distant rumble of traffic. He settles into a mustard-yellow armchair that once belonged to his mother. On the coffee table rests an engraved snuff box, an heirloom from his Italian grandmother, filled with scuffed pills and vitamin supplements. His private nurse, Marta, arrives briefly to check his blood pressure and remind him to take his medications: a cocktail for cholesterol, a daily aspirin, a low dose of beta blockers for his once fearless heart. He nods to her quietly, accustomed to her gentle but firm presence. Marta knows where all his aches hide and where his regrets fester. She does not pry, though she senses the hollows behind his eyes. Rather than reading newspapers or scrolling digital headlines, Pacino maintains a ritual. He replays key performances in his mind, as if testing the durability of his legacy. In his head, he reenacts the courtroom scene in "And Justice for All," speeds through the warehouse monologue in Dog Day Afternoon, and whispers Michael Corleone's icy promise: "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in." His voice is soft, almost tremulous, but the lines still pierce the air with raw intensity. When the echoes fade, he realizes he has repeated the Godfather Part 3 epilogue 3 times, each iteration awakening both pride and pain. A reminder that art can immortalize you yet never fully protect you from time's advance. After this private rehearsal, he might attempt a solitary walk around the small courtyard, sheltered by tall hedges and flowering jasmine vines. There he pauses at a stone bench beneath a weathered statue of the Virgin Mary, a relic he installed in honor of his childhood faith. He fingers the cool marble, offering a silent prayer for companionship, ease of body, and the forgiveness he rarely allows himself. Passers-by are oblivious. Neighbors rarely see him in daylight, but birds gather, chirping in cautious greeting as though aware they share this quiet refuge with a man both revered and anonymous. In mid-afternoon, an assistant drops off mail, fan postcards from overseas, bills rattling in unsealed envelopes, and a few handwritten notes from old colleagues. One is from screenwriter David Mamet, praising Pacino's recent reading of a short story at a virtual fundraiser, calling his gravelly tone still laced with volcanic magnetism. Another is from his daughter Olivia, aged 40, checking in on his knee pain and asking if he'd like to visit her home in Hollywood Hills this weekend. She signs her note with a tentative "Love you, Dad," hoping to bridge the silence that has defined their relationship since her early 20s. Pacino lingers over her words, fighting the urge to call her immediately, to confess loneliness, to apologize for missed birthdays. But he places the letter face down and retreats to his desk, letting the guilt settle into a familiar ache. Late afternoon brings a rare visitor, a longtime friend from the acting world, Jeff Goldblum, who slips in through a side gate. They embrace with a tenderness few have witnessed, two aging men clinging to the warmth of camaraderie. They repair to a small alcove by the front window, where Jeff offers a plate of truffled cheese and crackers. Their conversation drifts from the unavoidable gravity of advancing age to fleeting memories of past crop duster flights between shoots, shared taxi rides on studio lots, and the thrill of unplanned improv. For an hour, laughter lifts the shadows, two legends reliving their best scenes, reminding each other they once had the power to mesmerize millions. Then Jeff peers at the map of faded posters on the wall, Serpico, Donnie Brasco, The Irishman, and sighs, "Al, you're still the fire starter." Al nods, but says little, aware that even devotion has limits when death inches ever closer. As dusk falls, Pacino retreats to a near-empty library. A bar's worth of half-empty whiskey bottles sits on a lacquered shelf, tokens of an era when the bite of rare scotch sharpened his performance edge. Tonight he pours a neat measure, raises it to a photograph of his mother, and takes a steady sip. The burn coils in his chest, stoking thoughts of triumph and tragedy, roles ignited by his struggle, the thin line between aliveness and collapse. He contemplates one last attempt at relevance, a modest invitation to narrate a documentary on New York's gritty underworld, or perhaps a cameo in a stage revival of Edward Albee's Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. Each prospect tempts him with reunion and applause, yet he fears stepping back into public glare could expose his faltering memory and shaking hands. Better to linger here, where legend remains undimmed by live review. Night settles in, and Pacino turns on a single desk lamp, illuminating a blank canvas of paper on which he once dreamed of writing his own novel. Now he simply stares at the page, the cursor of ambition flashing unfulfilled possibilities. He presses his palms against his eyes, willing sleep to come and take him into dreams unburdened by solitude. In the darkness, the house stands silent once more, an echo chamber of one man's refusal to surrender the spotlight entirely, even as the world moves on without him. Afternoons often carry a ghost of the past into Al Pacino's present. After Jeff Goldblum departs, he retreats to his echoing hallway and passes life-worn photographs hung at eye level. His younger self leaning into Al Pacino's distinctive grin at Cannes, the cast of The Godfather in gutted sequences, a jubilant moment with Meryl Streep backstage in London. He pauses before each image, fingertips grazing the frame, as though trying to feel the pulse of memories in his veins. Occasionally, he catches sight of his reflection in a scratched mirror and studies the lines that have deepened around his eyes, proof that time erodes even the most formidable icons. By late afternoon, a faint melancholy sets in. He wanders into his personal screening room, once a fortress of cinematic triumph, now dim and dusty. He pads across the threadbare carpet to the recliner in the center, the same seat that once cradled him through Serpico and Dog Day afternoon marathons. He hits play on a Scarface reel and watches Tony Montana yell, "Say hello to my little friend." The raw energy still ignites something in him, yet he winces at each expletive's echo, as if the unbridled aggression now jars against his quiet reality. When the scene ends, he leaves the theater abruptly, unwilling to chase ghosts any longer. Instead, he clambers up a narrow staircase to a room he rarely enters, a cramped writing nook where a slender laptop sits atop a vintage typewriter table. Pages of incomplete dialogue for a one-man play lie scattered, snarling monologues that once dazzled Broadway, confessional pieces he envisioned but never staged. His fingers hover over the keyboard, but he lacks the drive to finish these lines, the friction too great to translate imagination into words. He sits in a swivel chair for minutes, staring at a blank document titled Pacino, unfiltered, then closes the lid and descends the stairs, leaving ideas and ambitions locked away. Evening brings a ritual of solitude. He emerges from his bedroom around 7, pulling on a threadbare robe before entering a narrow dining alcove illuminated by a single overhead lamp. The meal is simple: roasted chicken, steamed greens, and a glass of Bordeaux that's more vintage than vibrant. He eats methodically, eyes fixed on an unlit candle in the center of the table, as if searching for warmth in its unlit wick. Occasionally, he hears faint applause from neighbors' televisions, a sitcom laugh track, or a live sports highlight show, but the sound feels distant, irrelevant. After dinner, he carries his plate to the kitchenette, rinses it, and stacks it atop the morning's coffee mugs. Even dish duty seems a reminder of daily routines repeating without purpose. His phone rarely rings at night, but when it does, it's often a production assistant delivering optimistic updates, an indie director eager to cast him in a gritty ensemble piece, a documentarian seeking narration for a series on 1970s Hollywood. These calls start with pleasantries. "Hello, Mr. Pacino, hope you're well," and drift into proposals brimming with promise. Pacino listens, breathes slowly, then thanks them politely before declining. He cites busy schedules or health precautions, but the truth is simpler. He fears any new role might expose his uneven gait or betraying tremor. Better to preserve the mystique of a legend intact than risk tarnish in a lukewarm performance. Isolation deepens as the night deepens. He returns to the living room, where he sometimes picks up an old vinyl record, Vivaldi concertos or classic jazz standards, and sets the needle gingerly into the groove. Music fills the room in a crackling melody, and for a few minutes he drifts, eyes closed, transported by strings or saxophone to simpler times. But in his 70s and 80s, comfort often gives way to disquiet. The final notes echo hollowly, leaving him alone again in the flicker of a moving LP. Before bedtime, he conducts one final ritual, a slow typing of his password into an aging desktop computer, granting access to an early email address he rarely checks. He scrolls through messages, mostly spam and promotional newsletters, but mixed in are a handful of heartfelt notes from fans who remember his eyes burning in film frames and want him to know those performances still matter. He reads them with a solemn nod and sometimes types a brief, "Thank you. It means more than you know." But typically he closes the window without sending a reply. Guilt tugs at him for ignoring these gestures of devotion, but the energy required to correspond feels beyond reach. By midnight, Pacino stands before a tall armoire, opening its doors to select sleepwear, navy blue pajamas that have softened from countless washes. He dresses slowly, feeling the fabric fold over aging skin. Turning down the bed's covers, he slips between the sheets, stretches his legs into position, and closes his eyes. The house hushes around him, dreams await, and memories, both triumphant and regretful, seep into slumber. Outside, the city lights blur in the distance, indifferent to the man behind closed doors. In darkness, Al Pacino finds a final reprieve from days' lingering sadness, yet the ache of solitude remains, ready to greet him come morning's first light. Each morning Al Pacino awakens with the kind of resolve that once drove him to the heights of Hollywood's A-list, only to find himself alone at the breakfast table in a room that once played host to eager young actors snapping photos beside him. The table is set now with a plain white mug and a single croissant, hints of warmer days left cold from neglect. His reflection in the chipped kitchen window shows a stooped frame leaning on a cane, the color drained from suit jackets hung upon a vintage coat rack. He once wore those jackets with swagger on red carpets around the world, each fabric sheen reflecting camera flashes. Today, they're relics, symbols of a past that keeps drifting out of reach as calls from casting directors fall unanswered and invitations to gala benefits gather dust unread. He often stares at a letter from a respected director, an offer to appear in a limited series exploring themes of aging and regret. It sits unopened on a side table. He fears that accepting might expose the vulnerability he's tried to conceal, a weakened voice cracking under emotional strain, arthritic fingers fumbling lines he once delivered with cinematic ferocity. And so he lets it wait. In between darkened portraits of his younger self, he practices slow, deliberate breathing exercises adapted from yoga tutorials found on late-night television. A far cry from the manic energy of his method-acting roots, but a necessary concession to a body no longer willing to obey without question. Friends from his theater days, those who witnessed his creative fire long before Dog Day Afternoon cemented him as a screen legend, still attempt to draw him into intimate gatherings. Pitt and De Niro recommended he join virtual play readings with a small troupe of veteran actors, but Pacino remains hesitant. He used to thrive on the adrenaline of live performance, his voice filling houses in New York and London, but now he imagines stepping on a stage only to falter under the weight of recollection. Instead, he watches old footage on a wobbly flat screen, using a remote to pause on every raised eyebrow, every razor-sharp monologue, as if searching for instructions in his own gestures. But the guide is gone. In its place lies the knowledge that age reshapes even our greatest strengths into echoes of former glory, that he clings to the comfort of rare visits from his grandchildren, who affectionately call him Poppy. They sense his solitude and fill the house with scattered laughter as they climb stair banisters, shout through empty corridors, and treat dusty props as treasure troves in an imaginary film set. He watches them from the doorway, the corners of his mouth lifting into a bittersweet smile as he remembers parenting his own children long ago. For a few hours, the mansion comes alive with youthful chaos, the ghosts of his career receding behind the voices of little ones. But once they depart, his footsteps echo through the quiet halls, and he returns to a half-completed screenplay tucked into a drawer, a story he once planned to direct but never summoned the strength to finish. Media outlets occasionally spark rumors about a comeback, fueling tabloids with sensational headlines like "Pacino prepares final act." He reads these stories with detached amusement, aware that the public still craves a reprise, but wary of compromising the dignity he strives to preserve. When reporters knock on the front gate, he declines to comment, offering only a terse wave or a polite nod before retreating behind those heavy drapes. He remembers how his piercing gaze once commanded attention. Now he values the anonymity of shade. There is a serenity in the secrecy, a calm that contrasts sharply with the frenetic filming schedules and press junkets of his youth. And yet serenity mingles with regret, for he wonders whether the trade was worth the quiet. Health challenges intensify his sense of fragility. His long-standing battle with high blood pressure now includes sporadic arrhythmia that interrupts sleep with startling palpitations. Medication regimens, once simple, have become intricate. Tablets for joint inflammation, supplements for brain health, eye drops for glaucoma. He keeps track of them in a notebook, checking off doses like a retired general, maintaining a meticulous log. He attends occasional checkups at a nearby clinic staffed by professionals who treat him with reverence, exclaiming at the chance to examine a living cinematic treasure. But he leaves those appointments with mixed relief, grateful for expert care, yet acutely aware that each symptom marks a step further from the invincible performer he once embodied. Still, there are fleeting moments of beauty. He visits a local art gallery opening to support a friend's exhibit, his posture straightening at familiar greetings from museum staff who have grown up admiring him. He lingers before a painting of a solitary tree under moonlight, its stillness reflecting his current landscape, quiet, introspective, and tinged with the mysterious potential of hidden growth. Returning home, he picks up his aging guitar and strums softly, coaxing simple chords that feel like old friends. In the music, he rediscovers a part of himself that neither time nor isolation can erase. The artist eager to connect, to create, to remind the world that though he has slipped from the spotlight's glare, his heart still pulses with the same fierce artistry that once conquered every screen. Late-night silence has become Al Pacino's most trusted companion. In those hours, when California's traffic fades to a distant hum and the sky shifts to a deep indigo, he sits in his living room recliner with a cashmere throw draped over his knees. The glow of the muted television flickers across his lined face as he replays old interviews in which he brimmed with purpose and fiery intensity. Tonight, though, he pauses on a clip of himself in Heat, watching Robert De Niro's eyes meet his across a fictional diner table. The memory of that raw, magnetic energy still sparks something inside him, but it also carries a sting, a reminder that the screen can immortalize moments, yet cannot preserve a soul's vibrancy against the tide of time that on a rare impulse. Pacino rises and moves to his upright piano in the corner, opening the lid with a gentle creak. He settles onto the worn bench, fingertips hovering over the keys like a conductor poised to cue an orchestra. His hands search out a simple chord progression, the one that once soothed him during long nights on Broadway, and he plays a broken rendition of Moon River. The melody wobbles as his arthritic joints protest, yet he persists, closing his eyes and letting the notes echo in the empty room. For a brief moment, the ghosts of his former self gather around him, the young actor hungry for every stage, the breakout star chased by spotlights, the master of his craft who believed nothing could ever dim his fire. Morning arrives in a pale wash of gray light that filters through heavy drapes. Pacino awakens to the familiar ache of isolated living and contemplates one of the unopened letters perched on his nightstand, a handwritten note from his grandson, inviting him to Christmas dinner. He feels the warmth of family extending across that single sheet of stationery, yet the instinct to retreat wins over. He stuffs the invitation into his pocket, promising himself he will call one day soon, though the promise feels hollow on his lips. Instead, he pours another espresso in the kitchenette and glances at the wall of awards assembled above the fridge. Their gleaming bronze and crystal surfaces catch the early light, yet their shine fails to penetrate the solitude he has come to wear like a second skin. He considers his legacy as he prepares for the day. Critics and box office figures have long cemented his place in cinema history, but Pacino measures worth in different terms now. The synchronicity of film dialogue with raw human emotion, the visceral feedback from live audiences, the unexpected spark of innovation that once drove him toward radical roles. He clings to the hope that even now, in his 8th decade, he might rediscover that spark. He replays monologues in his mind, layering them with new inflections, new emotional textures, an exercise to stretch memory and remind himself that creativity need not be confined by age. By midday, his longtime assistant, Carla, arrives with a selection of script pages for an upcoming independent film. The project is small, an intimate drama about a disillusioned professor reconnecting with his daughter, but it offers Pacino a chance to explore fatherhood through the lens of regret and redemption. Carla slides the pages across the table, her eyes searching his for a reaction. He picks them up, feeling the weight of the inked words beneath his fingertips. He pauses at the first scene, envisioning himself delivering lines as Charles, the protagonist who yearns to mend broken bonds. The role resonates more deeply than any gangster or vigilante part ever did. Yet he hesitates, recalling the tremor in his voice and the falter in his step. He places the script back on the table, offering a soft, "Let me think on it." Carla nods, understanding the careful deliberation this decision demands. Afternoon sunlight warms the courtyard outside his window. Pacino ventures onto the veranda, leaning against the railing as he observes a world in motion. Neighbors stroll by with dogs, children cycle past on colorful bikes, and delivery drivers drop off groceries for houses still full of life. He inhales the scent of jasmine and fresh-cut grass, longing to feel connected once more. In a rare moment of resolve, he labels his cane and hefts a small duffel bag onto his shoulder. Inside, a fresh change of clothes and a leather-bound journal. He aims to drive to his daughter's home, to stand at her front door and press the letter into her hand in person. Yet the engine's hum feels too loud, the drive too daunting. He turns the wheel away and heads back inside, a familiar ache settling in his chest. By evening, Pacino retreats to a rotary dial phone, a vintage fixture he refuses to replace. In the glow of a single lamp, he lifts the handset and presses it against his ear, listening to the dial tone crackle with static. He leans back, memories of youth intruding in the rhythm of the ring. The next thing he knows, he's hung up, unsettled by his own vulnerability. The phones in his life, once conduits for delivering passionate performances, now feel like interviews he cannot pass. Dinner arrives. Pasta with marinara, a small green salad. He eats mechanically, focusing on the texture more than the taste. On the counter, his caretaker Marta places a vase of fresh lilies, her gift from a neighboring florist who still remembers him as a fixture of Hollywood glamour. She reminds him gently that a few lines from the script need his final choice. He nods, swallowing a bite of salad, and closes his eyes. In the space between each conscious breath, he weighs fear against the promise of reconnection, with art, with family, with himself. Late night falls again, and the television plays muted images of award ceremonies past, him shaking off previous awards, bowing to audiences, gripping statuettes as if they might crack with the weight of aspiration. He lifts his hand to the screen, fingertips trembling, as if trying to touch the warmth of an incandescent memory. Then he switches off the set and sits in complete darkness, the hush so profound he can almost hear his own heartbeat aligning with the silent spaces of an empty house. In that darkness, a small determination flickers. Perhaps tomorrow he will answer Carla's call, perhaps he will write back to his grandson, perhaps he will open that director's letter. In the end, he knows the final act of his story will be not in another spotlight, but in the quiet courage to reach beyond his shadows. Nonetheless, as Pacino lies awake listening to distant traffic, a new resolve takes shape. He reaches for his phone and finally dials Olivia's number, hearing her voice cracked with surprise and concern. In that moment, the walls around his heart soften, and he realizes that the final performance of his life should be one of connection rather than solitude. Tomorrow, he vows to call his director friend, to open that letter, to place one more signature on a script unproduced. The world may no longer need the fierce intensity he wielded in his youth, but it still needs his humanity and wisdom. As dawn breaks, Al Pacino closes his eyes with a sense of purpose returning for the first time in years, ready, at last, to step from shadow into life again. He inhales hope, determined to cherish each precious moment ahead.